My name is Richard Moon, and I'm a member of the law faculty at the University of Windsor. Well, I think an issue that remains highly topical has to do with hate speech in Canada. It's come to the fore again. Well, the Supreme Court of Canada, a number of years ago, upheld both the criminal code prohibition on hate speech, the willful promotion of hatred, and also Human Rights Code, the Canada Human Rights Code, restriction on hate speech. The court at the time was split. It was a 5-4 split in each of the two cases. Keegstra case upholding the criminal code prohibition, the case called Taylor upholding the Canada Human Rights Act limit on hateful speech. In both cases, the court was split 5-4. In both cases, the dissenting judgment was in fact written by Chief Justice McLaughlin, who, not then the Chief Justice, but who is now the Chief Justice. And a number of issues within Canada have brought this to the fore, and in fact the issue seems to be being litigated in the courts again. There's a challenge to Human Rights Code restrictions on hate speech that is in fact before the Supreme Court of Canada. The particular challenge relates to the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code restriction on hate speech, and the Supreme Court of Canada several months ago heard a case dealing with that. And in front of the federal courts at the moment is a challenge to the Canada Human Rights Act restriction on hate speech. This remains understandably a contentious issue. Canada, in establishing these laws, has charted a slightly different course than the United States, although of course it's much closer to most other countries in the world. The United States is a bit of an outlier on this question, having adopted a very libertarian approach, an approach that really says all speech should be free, and whatever the consequences or harm of that speech might be, the individuals who engage in that harmful activity are ultimately responsible for it, and not in fact the speaker who may be seeking to encourage harmful activity or racist views or whatever we may be speaking of. I think that this is an issue like hate speech is bound to be controversial for a variety of reasons. One reason relates to simply the question of, if we're protecting speech, then I guess we're trusting individuals to make their own judgments. Somebody says something to me that is racist or odious in some way, I hear it, I recognize it as such, I reject it, and clearly the vast majority of people do that. So one view about speech is you really do just trust the audience to make its own judgment. The speech itself is not harmful in this view. It's only if individuals are persuaded by its message and take action in response to it that it may be harmful. So that first view then is speech is never in itself harmful. It should be broadly protected, and we should leave it to individuals to make their own judgments about the truth or validity of what's being said to them. The other view, I think, a little more practical and view towards which I'm sympathetic, is that speech can occur in a lot of different situations and contexts, and the ability of individuals to make independent and thoughtful judgments is often limited or restricted. And the more extreme the speech, the less willing perhaps we should be to take the chance that somebody may take it seriously and might act accordingly. Often it's said we should respond to bad speech, hate speech as an example of that, through more speech. We encourage other views, and as long as an individual hears a variety of views, he or she hopefully can make not just their own, but a wise decision about it. But increasingly we live in a world of a very fragmented audience. The internet, obviously in a whole range of ways, has been enormously beneficial to the spread of ideas and information, and we see the vital role it's played in encouraging democratic movements in different places. But the internet also works in a particular way in which the audience is highly fragmented, in which people go to websites, engage with others who already share the views they hold, or at least views that are in some way sympathetic. And as a result, there isn't a lot of engagement across different perspectives. So what you discover is there are a lot of hate speech sites out there. The only people who go to them are people who have some sympathy or inclination towards those views. And the people who go on these sites, post on them, can sometimes feed each other's animosity, encourage increasingly dangerous and disturbing and perhaps ultimately violent behaviors. And I think we need to be worried about that. So I think that's the other view. That's the other view, I think, about hate speech regulation. Now, the other challenge with any kind of regulation of hate speech is how do you draw the line? We can be concerned about racist speech, but the reality is we live in a world where people are very race conscious and where racial thinking just unfortunately cuts across all kinds of discourses. People stereotype, they make assumptions of different kinds, and it's unrealistic to imagine that we could somehow cleanse public discourse of any kind of thinking, stereotyping like that. And so if we want to restrict hate speech, we have to try to isolate what is really extreme, dangerous speech. But drawing the line between the more familiar, standard forms of racial thinking and racist speech and the extreme forms of speech that we want to restrict can be a challenge, can raise a whole set of difficulties itself.